Hi guys. Hey Nick, how are you? Hey Franking Frog, how are you? How are you? Hey guys. So we are in the book of Esther, guys. Thank you for coming through. Thank you for the likes. I hope you are all good. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. I hope you are all doing good. We are in the book of Esther. And this is the last of the history books, right? The last of the history books before we go into poetry books, which will be Job. We're already in Psalms every Sunday. We'll be in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Songs, right? Um, so that's what we will be in. But yes, this is the last of the history books, and we're in Esther, the book of Esther. Um, so before I go in to reading the book, I just want to give a little context, right? Of the book of Esther, and the audience that the book of Esther is to. Not to say that we can't take anything away from the books that we read in the Bible to start applying to our own lives, right? Which we should be. So before I start every book, I like to give a little bit of context. I just like to really talk about the audience it's who the audience is for, and then I go into the book to read. It just helps you get a little bit of our understanding of the events that are going on, and again why the book is written, right? So we're in the book of Esther now. Esther is a Jewish woman. She is a Jewish woman. And this is set during the Persian times, right? So this is post-exile. So if you remember, we read the book of Ezra, and we read the book of Nehemiah. Those books are post-exile. So if you remember, in Chronicles, or in Kings, because Chronicles is just talking about the events again, God had exiled the Israelites. He removed them from his sight because he was so angry with them. They were doing evil in front of him, and he didn't want to basically see that anymore. So he exiled them off to Babylon, and he scattered them all around, right? So some 70 years after, God has said, I want to reconcile with you guys. I want to start to build a relationship with you guys, and I want you to come back and rebuild the temple, rebuild Jerusalem again, right? Because you remember, the temples were burned down, the Jerusalem wall was knocked down, and basically Jerusalem was a ruin, right? So it was during the Persian Empire. So the king of that time said, to the exiles, be free to go back and build Jerusalem, right? Go and build back your temple, right? Because God had given that king the go-ahead to do so. So if you remember in Ezra, the first wave of the Israelites who went to go and start to build the temple after some 70 years, they went and started, and then if you remember, the officials then tried to stop them building the temple. And then the second wave came to rebuild the rest of the temple in Ezra. But in that time, there was a bit of a gap where the temple wasn't being built. And that's where Esther sits, right? Esther sits in right in that gap there. So it was during that time where it was exile, but it wasn't too near to where Nehemiah started, right? Hey, singing songs. Hey, Brenda. Hey, Brenda. Thank you for coming through. So that's, as I said, that's where the book of Esther sits, right? So she sits right in that time period where the temple wasn't being built. The first wave had came to start to build the temple. The officials said stop, put a halt on that. Some time had passed by, and then the second wave came. They rebuilt the temple, and then it moves on to Nehemiah, right, who then starts to build the Jerusalem wall, right? So so that would be between Ezra 6 and 7. You say 6 and 7, but I would say from 4 to 7, chapters 4 to 7, right? Around that time is where Esther would be placed. And as I said, Nehemiah occurred later, right? Reason why the book of Esther is written is for the exiles Jews, right? So she was part of the exiles, right? Not the immediate, but the later generation. So she was part of an exile. So they're scattered around, and she's in this is the Persian Empire, right? So that is the audience for, right? She's Jewish, and she's part of the exile, and during that time they did have the go ahead to go and rebuild the temple, and some of them didn't go and rebuild the temple. Some of them stayed, right? And you have to remember, at that time they were starting to rebuild Jerusalem, so Jerusalem was looking a bit crazy, right? It's looking a bit not put together, right? And some people decided to stay put, right, in the Persian Empire, right? They decided to stay put there and not go back and build the temple, right? But also, I was thinking about it, right? Esther's family could have gone. They could have gone, but they didn't go, right? God has a plan. God has a plan for everything, because he was going to use Esther for his own glory, right? For her to save her own people, right? So there's always a reason why God does something, right? So if he says to you stay put somewhere, stay put somewhere. If he says to you move on somewhere, right? But just know there's a reason why God does everything, right? There's a reason why he does what he does. And as I said, Esther's family could have moved and gone, and they were freely okay to go and go back to Jerusalem, but they didn't go back. They stayed put, right? God was gonna use Esther for a bigger picture. So guys, we just have to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture. Hey, Real Odds, thank you for coming through. So you just have to think about the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture was that Esther was going to save her people, God's people, right? And he needed her, right? So it's just to give you a little context of, the understanding. You have to remember that there are, in this time, it was a minority, right? So Esther and her people was a minority in a country, in another country, right? Remember, God had scattered his people, right? Post-exile. So let's just remember that when we're reading it, because it just, honestly, when you put the context to reading the book, it gives you a wider understanding of why God did what he did, right? So we have to remember, we want to see God in everything that we read. We want to see Jesus in everything that we read, and we want to start to apply it to our life. God's thoughts and ways are higher than us. Exactly. Exactly, it is. There's always a reason he does something. So just remember that, right? So that's a little bit of context. But I also want to give a little context with Mordecai and Haman, right? Mordecai and Haman. So it's good to have a Bible study book, guys. So this is the MacArthur Study Bible. I usually use the ESV Bible study, but we're going to use the MacArthur, right? So I just want to give you a little context on Mordecai and Haman, and then when we get into the book of Esther, you can sort of understand why Haman's feud is so detestable to the Jews, right? So it says here, the historical genesis for the drama played out between Mordecai, a Benjamin descendant of Saul, and Haman, an Agagite, goes back almost 1,000 years when the Jews exited from Egypt and were attacked by the Amalekites, whose lineage began with Amalek, grandson of Esau. God pronounced his curse on the Amalekites, which resulted in their total elimination as a people. Although Saul received orders to kill the Amalekites, including their king Agag, he disobeyed and incurred God's displeasure. Samuel finally attacked Agag into pieces because of his lineage from Agag. Haman carried deep hostility towards the Jews. Right? So this is a long-going feud that's been going on for 1,000 years, right? It's been going on for a long time, and Haman has despised the Jews, right? He's always despised. It just makes a little bit more sense that when he is being horrible to Mordecai, who is a Jew, right? You understand, who's a Jew. You kind of understand the history between them, you know, the generation and their family, and there's a long going feud going on, right? So just make sure when you're reading the Bible, make sure you get context in what you're reading. Make sure you know the audience it was intended for. So it just gives you a little bit more thinking process in when you are reading the Bible, right? So when you're having a deep dive, make sure you have a deep dive in the Bible, right? Make sure you do, because God will guide you, and he will give you wisdom. He will give you gems, honestly. So this is Esther chapter 1. This is what happened during the time of Artaxerxes. The Artaxerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media. The princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink without restriction, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirit from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Ahuman, Bitha, Habana, Bigtha, Abagtha, Ziha, and Carcass, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Since it was his customary for the king to consult experts in the matter of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king: Karshina, Shitha, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Makmukan, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the king Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Makmukan replied in the presence of the king and nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the people of the province of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who had heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the law of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Makmukan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household using his native language. Thank you, guys. So you see that when God sees that you're not obedient, right, he will put someone in place of you who will be obedient, who will follow his commands, right, and who will do the will of do his will, right. He will put someone else better in place of you if he sees that you cannot be obedient. And this is what's happened here. Queen Vashti has shown that she's being disobedient, right, and she's being replaced with someone else, right, which makes room for Esther. Chapter 2. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for a beautiful young virgin for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman was also known as Esther. had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Then the king's order and edict had been proclaimed. Many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked to and fro near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Everything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Hashasgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of the uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the, the 10th the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So God is favoring. You see how God puts his favor on you? God is favoring Esther, right? So he looks after his own, right? He looks after his own. God gave Esther a mission which she did not know, right? And he favored her, right? So she got the blessings from God. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officials who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and made to be true, the 2 officials were impaled on the pole. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. I like the song, the movie about Esther, one night with the king can change everything. Amen. I would have to go and check that out. Chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, alleviating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him any honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, Why do you disobey the king's command? Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. Then when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's law. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give them 10,000 talents and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. On the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various people. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, and the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink by the city of Susa, but the city of Susa was bewildered. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth and ashes and went out to the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Right? So Mordecai has heard the distressing news. He's in grief, he's in mourning, right? And that's what usually it means when you're in sackcloth and ashes. You're like humbling yourself before the Lord. You're really in distress about what's going to happen, and that's just their way of saying, you know, to God, help me. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter in every province to which the edict and the order of the king came. There was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So as I said, sackcloth was associated with grief, death, bad omens, mournings, right? And the king's orders was that was not allowed to come near the palace, right? That was the protocol, is not to see that, right? Which for me, I question why would they not let the why could they not go past the gate, right? And it's because, you know, in the king's palace, right, he just wants it to be seen as joyful and peaceful. He doesn't want to see anything that is negative, really, right? He just wants to see what he sees in his own world and in his palace, right? And he wants to see the joy, he wants to see the peace, right? And I say that is, you know, that I say that is Ignorance is bliss, right? Ignorance is bliss, right? He just doesn't want to know what else is going on before his walls, right? Because he just wants to make it seem like everything's okay, everything's all good, right? So the moment someone comes with sackcloth, which is associated with grief and death, they have to deal with that, and that's not something that they want to deal with, right? So again, they're shielding the king from all these bad things, from seeing anything negative, because they just want to give this illusion that everything is okay, right? Everything is fine, right? But you know, sometimes you cannot be in ignorance, right? And everything is not bliss, right? Sometimes we have to see things for how they are and tackle it head on, right? And not be ignorant to what is going on, right? When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. But 30 days has passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time like this, right? God is God. Mordecai is basically saying, right, you can keep silent, right? You can not do anything because you're afraid that, you know, the king might kill you for going in front of him and telling him what's going on, right? But someone else will give us if you don't do it, someone else will give us relief, someone else will deliver us, right? But don't think you're going to get off easy, right? You too are going to face some consequences, right? You're not going to get off easy, right? You are going to face consequences as well, right? So it's just to remember, like, not to remain silent. If you see something bad happening, just don't remain silent, right? Speak up, right? So then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Chapter 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given to you. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asks. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted. Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he elevated him above the other nobles and officials. We see Haman's arrogance, we see Haman's pride getting the best of him, right? So he's becoming very confident in himself, right? Becoming very self-reliant in what he thinks he can do. And that not all Haman, and that's not all Haman added, I am the only son Queen Esther invited to accompany the queen to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole up reaching to a height of 50 cubits and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This succession delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep. He ordered the book of the Chronicles, the records of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officials who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, let him bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horses, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He rode Mordecai and led him on the horseback through the city gates, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Do you see that? Do you see that Mordecai was leading in hate, right? He was leading in hate, right? He was going to tell the king, I'm going to kill Mordecai. And the king was like, no, I'm going to honor him. I'm going to honor him for saving my life, right? And you know that must have hurt Mordecai. You know Mordecai must have been really, really like seething inside to know that now the man that he was going to say he's going to kill, he has to now ride around and say, this is the king who honors this man, who delights in this man, right? And he has to do what the king says, right? So he the guy that he doesn't like, Mordecai, right? The degree that has been set out by him to annihilate his people, right, is now he having to go around and ride around the city with Mordecai, right? You know, how God works is amazing, right? Because um, he will see that you're doing wicked, right? And those who are genuinely doing good, right? He will honor that, right? He will honor that. He will vindicate you, right? So don't think that you won't be. God will if your heart is pure and you're genuine, God will vindicate you. Afterwards, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the king's kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet. But no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such thing? Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, the vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in rage, left his wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall. See, be kind to people. Be kind to people, because you just never know when you will need to, see that. You never know when you see that person again. You never know when you need that person again, right? So you be kind to people, right? Because in this turn of events, now you see Haman coming to Esther, asking for forgiveness, asking to be saved. Hey, Joe, give a come free, asking to be saved, right? And the enemy, the adversary, the devil, right? The devil was trying to scheme here. He was trying to destroy, because that's what the devil does. He comes to kill and destroy, right? He comes to kill and destroy. And he was ready to go all out, right? But Esther has so much favor on her, right? She's so blessed that was not going to happen, right? Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." Impale him on it. The thing that Haman set up for Mordecai is now going to be the thing for his own death, right? Impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai became into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" King Xerxes applied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews. "I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews, as it seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mount couriers, who rode fast horses especially bred for kings. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers riding the royal house went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing a royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor in every province and every city to which the edict of the king came. There was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrations, and many people of other nationalities became Jews. Because fear of the Jews had seized them. Alright, so you see how Mordecai stood on business. We see how Esther stood on business, right? She was ready to risk her life for her people. She was ready to do whatever it took to save her people, right? And because they stood on what they believed, because they wasn't pushed out of fear, because they knew that the picture was bigger than them and they had to save their people, right? And remember, God made a covenant, right, saying that, the he will he will keep his promise to David, right, that he won't annihilate all of the Israelites, right, and he's kept his promise, right. He's kept his promise that um, he kept a remnant. He kept a remnant. He kept some people left so that the house of David should be able to go on, right? Because if all the Jews are annihilated, then how do we go forward with King David's bloodline, right? And for the Messiah to come, right? So you see how God sets everything up. He had a plan. There was a bigger plan, right? Chapter 9, on the 19th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them, and all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Hadatha, Dalphon, Aspartha, Porphatha, Adaliah, Aridatha, Pasmasta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaizatha, the sons of Haman, son of Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted. If it pleases the king, Esther answered, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and give relief from their enemies. They killed 25,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and on the 15th day rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day of giving presents to each other. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes near and far, that they should celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrows was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote to them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hamadatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had put the poor, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on the poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word Pur, because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, word of goodwill and assurance to establish these days of Purim at their designated times as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regards to their time of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in these records. Chapter 10. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, prominent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Hey Zay, hey Shelly, thank you for coming through. The end. That's the end of Esther. So you can see that, Mordecai, as I said, spoke up for what he believed in. He didn't shy from speaking up, right? And that's what we have to do as followers of Christ. We should want to speak up, right, and speak the good news of Jesus Christ, right, and tell people about the gospel, right? We should want to be doing the good work for God, right? We should be wanting to do his will, right? And Mordecai and Esther is just such a great example of what it is to really stand on business. They're risking their life for what they believe in, right? Risking their life for other people, right? All in the name for God, right? All in the name for God. I also just want to say, to end this out, one thing that was pointed out to me during my studies, right, was that if you notice in the books before, you will always hear like the Lord is speaking or God is there. But in Esther, which I didn't notice at first, right, when I first read the book of Esther, this is my first time reading it. The second time, right, I didn't really notice that there was no mention of God in here, right? But Esther's name in Hebrew means hidden or concealed, right? Esther means hidden or concealed, right? That's in Hebrew. And I believe in Persian it's star, right? Star. But Esther's name is hidden or concealed in Hebrew, right? When I thought about this, I never really thought too much that God's name wasn't in this, right? No mention of the Lord or anything, right? Because I knew that God was there, right? I knew that God, this is all by God's strength, right? So I didn't need an explanation, or I didn't need to know that God's name needed to be in there to know that it was by his hands that all of this was done, right? Because as we have read previously in the books, right, God has in the books in the Bible, right, so far God has always said it's by his strength, yeah, that it's by his hand, right? So when I read this, in my head, I'm just thinking, I'm already thinking it's by God's strength, it's by his hand, it's God's favor in Esther. This is all God, right? So when I was, looking more into the book of Esther, and it was brought up, that, you know, God's name, Lord, is not mentioned in Esther like it is in the other books, right? It just got me thinking that, when you think God is not working, he's in the background, right? He's there working overtime for us, he's protecting us, he's providing for us, right? So when we think that he's not there, God is present, right? He is doing what he needs to do, right? And I think it's just about keeping your faith and your trust in God, right? And knowing that he will do it, and it's by his strength that he will do it, right? We've just read the book of Esther, right? And we've just seen the strength of Esther and Mordecai in this, right? um it's all by God, right? It's all by God. It I mean, some things just don't need to be explained to know that it's by his strength that these things are happening, right? um so again, it's just remember that God is there working in the background, right? Also, um, Jesus' second coming, right? This is that Jesus' second coming. Jesus will protect the elects, the ones who are faithful and obedient to him, right? So remember that when Jesus comes back, he's going to protect those who stood for him, who were faithful, who didn't run in fear of his name, that were, out there proclaiming the good news of Jesus, right? And who was operating out of love and, helping others, right? Here to serve others, help the needy, help the poor, help those who need help, right? So it's, Esther is just a great reminder to be courageous, to stand bold in your faith, to keep proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ, to not be in fear of what other people think, right? To not be in fear of what other people think, to not be in fear to speak about Jesus because you think you're going to get persecuted, right? That's what comes with walking with Christ. You're going to get persecuted, you're going to get mocked, people are going to look at you crazy. That all comes with it, right? It's just for you to really stand on it and be like, I'm here to do the will of my Father. I'm here to speak about Jesus, right? I have a mission. I'm here to do something, right? I'm here to proclaim the good news, and of Jesus Christ, that there is salvation waiting for you, and you can inherit the gift of eternal life, right? You can inherit that, and that's all by God's grace. That's all by God's grace, right? We have to remember it's not by our righteousness, it's by Jesus. It's by Jesus's work. So I'm just gonna end it there. I know I've given you guys like a lot of information, right? And again, you get in the book of Esther, you sit and you do your own Bible studies, right? But I just like to get you thinking of when you're reading in the any book in the Bible, just start to think about the context a little more, just start to think about the audience, just start to think about where you can see God, where you can see Jesus, and how you can start to apply it to your life daily, right? That is the main takeaway when you're doing your Bible study, right? Is to make sure that you're really understanding what you're reading, right? So even if it's a chapter a day is better than reading 10 chapters and not knowing what you're reading, right? Even if it's a chapter you read, you have a good deep dive into it, and then or whether you want to have a good deep dive into the context of your book you're reading before you get into reading it. It all helps with your reading. So I'm gonna leave it there. We are in the book of Job. We are in the book of Job on Friday. We're in the book of Job on Friday. So we have ended in the history books. We have ended the history books. We are now in the poetry books. So thank you all that have stuck it out, because I know that it's a lot of information, but thank you all that stuck it out. Thank you for those that have liked, thank you for those that have comment. I really appreciate it. As I said, I'll be back Friday, and I'll see you and I will see you on Friday.